We like to go in depth here on the issues, trends, and challenges taking place around us in farmland ownership, management, and investment. But this week, those forces collide in breaking news. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and welcome to the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Pure Prairie Poultry shut down its chicken processing plant in Charles City, Iowa. It's a community that's been losing population over the years, and it now has about 7,400 people in this northeast part of the state. So losing a plant that had promised 400 jobs is a big loss. Ron Keene had been watching the fallout from the company's collapse from not too far away, and also from two different perspectives. Ron is faculty associate and extension specialist in poultry science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but he's also been active on the Wisconsin Poultry and Egg Industries Association. We start off our conversation by trying to gauge the impact of the shutdown, along with the hundreds of thousands of chickens that farmers are stuck with. Hey, I wonder if you can start out, just kind of talk about how bad is this situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bad situation. I think, fortunately, it's very rare that we have something like this. So, it's anytime you have animals that are just there and really not being fed, that's a bad situation. And I think it's going to probably end up being a pretty big waste of a lot of good protein, I would guess.
Was it a well-intentioned business idea to try to restart this plant and it just couldn't make a go of it? Kind of circumstances hit him at the wrong time, or what?
I think so. I think that's my understanding. It's going to be a difficult challenge to try to get into this industry. There's large companies already in it. While they had sort of a niche product, it's still going to be a challenge. And I think probably that was the biggest thing that, there seemed to be markets there, but maybe they weren't quite what they thought they were.
And I think they've talked about kind of the timing of it when they restarted and got into it. It was right as prices were down and things were not going in their favor.
Yeah. And, a lot of other prices have gone up. So
Yeah.
fuel costs and labor costs and things like that. So yeah, probably a double whammy there.
So your role with the organization, with the association, how do you look at this? I mean, obviously you're feeling for these local folks who, are raising all these birds and all of a sudden they've got nowhere to go with them, and they've got, in some cases, it sounds like not enough individual resources to feed these because they're not getting paid.
Yeah. Like say, I really feel for the individual producers. This isn't a typical situation. Generally, there's backing there. Even if a company was going to go out of business, they would do it over a time period and phase it out rather than something this abrupt.
Yeah, where you just kind of turn off the lights and that's it. No real warning.
That's what it seems. Yeah. Yeah.
So does it make it, I don't know if this is a weird question, but we're kind of looking at a three-state area as these producers were all impacted by this. Does that make this more complicated or not? Because we've seen departments of agriculture on the state level kind of jump in and try to do what they can, but is it more complex or not? Or how does this go?
I guess I think, there's a little bit more complexity there in that, like you said, the Iowa seemed to have a little more plan in place to handle a situation like this. And my understanding, Minnesota did not and Wisconsin did not. So from that aspect, yeah, it's a little more of a challenge. Other than that, I think it would be, it's going to be a bad situation no matter what. But maybe that makes it another added twist.
So is there anything that we all have to do in the future here, or is this kind of a, not quite a one-off, but sorta, just something really, really bad that happened and everybody's got to kind of pick up and move on somehow, or what?
I've been thinking about that, and I mean, again, it seems to be kind of a one-time situation. At least in the past, we haven't had this situation. Probably the closest thing was through COVID, when some of the processing plants were shut down. Maybe that was more of a similar situation, where we had, the swine industry felt like they had pigs that there was nowhere to go with them, for example. So, yeah, I don't know what we would do differently necessarily. Um, I don't know.
So backing off this, what's it like these days for the poultry industry? We've been dealing with bird flu. It seems like it doesn't quite ebb and flow, but we've had a couple of times where we really got hammered with it, but clearly we're not rid of it. So how do you assess the overall health of the industry?
Yeah. And I would say, the broilers have been pretty fortunate. They have not had a lot of issue with bird flu. Um, Turkey growers have really been hammered by it, and I think they're still struggling quite a bit with that. There's probably also some demand concerns with turkey that maybe hasn't kept up with chicken meat. Um, Egg producers again have struggled with bird flu. They don't have the demand issues there. So fortunately, demand has been strong for eggs. So I think if you're not the one that gets hit with influenza, you're doing quite well because prices have been high. So that's kind of a mixed bag, I guess, depending on who gets hit.
Yeah, definitely from the consumer side, you're looking, all you know is when you're picking up a dozen eggs, you're thinking, what the heck's happened over the last couple of years?
Right. Yeah. And they've certainly been high. I would argue, compared to a lot of other protein sources, they're still pretty good value, but definitely higher than what we've been used to.
Yeah, there are certain parts of this that make me kind of wonder that, as you point out about a protein source, I mean, eggs comparatively, there's still a bargain overall. When you maybe when you're comparing it to a couple of years ago, you're thinking, hey, wait a minute, it's way more expensive to make my omelet. But big picture, you have to look at that overall cost, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of amazing how inexpensive they were in the past for us to be in this situation, I guess. Yeah.
All right, now you came into this. You grew up on a farm, right? Aren't you a Nebraska guy?
I did. Yep.
What was your
Small
background?
farm.
Small
Yeah.
farm, all right.
Yep.
What'd you guys have?
So we did, pigs were probably our main thing. Although again, we would farrow a dozen sows twice a year, something like that. So pretty small. We had a beef herd, raised Herefords. Dad had about 400 acres of cropland that he farmed. And then we had backyard poultry flock, which was my kind of favorite. So yeah.
Okay, I'm listening to you talk here, and you're talking about dad's hogs and dad's beef. I was wondering where the poultry side was going to come into this, or if you did a complete left turn somewhere in life. I was wondering how you got here.
Yeah, no, they say in second grade I knew I was going to work with poultry. So, yeah, it was small flock. My mom really liked the chickens and I really liked them. And the genetics are really fun to play with some of the exhibition chickens and things. So, yeah, I just really liked it.
Where's the chicken industry going, do you think?
I mean, I think for the most part, it'll be similar to what we have now. We have pretty large companies with contract growers, at least in the chicken meat industry.
Hmm.
Um, Layers and egg production, I'm not sure. I think we're still going to see the very large farms like we have because of the economies of scale. Um, but we sure seem to be having a growth in the pastured production, 10,000, 20,000 bird. So I think you're going to maybe see both of those continue, I would say.
When you talk about that 10 to 20,000, what's driving that?
Um, I think it's the consumer that wants to have that pastured bird, sees that sustainability issue there. Um, maybe it's a reminder of the older style.
Hmm.
People want to get back to that, I think. So that's what I would see.
We see a push like California where they're dictating more about how you're raising animals. I think Massachusetts too, I believe. Is this something that you see expanding? Will this kind of extend beyond their state's borders where other states are gonna maybe get more involved in this?
I think there will be some state driven. Um, I really think sort of by default, the industry is going to go to cage free. Um, there are currently about 40% cage free
Hmm.
nationwide. Um, the point I guess I've had people ask me, and I always tell them, I don't think anybody is building any new cage facilities. So another 20 years, and I think we're just going to kind of eventually go to cage free because nobody is building new. And so anything that's being built new right now, to my knowledge, is cage free. So
Does that make you think then that this is more consumer driven? While you have this kind of pushback by some saying that, they don't want the heavy hand of government, but because of, like to your point, 40% already, doesn't that
yeah.
demonstrate that the consumers are the ones asking for this?
Um, that's an interesting question. I think some of it may be that, although I think you will see that the actual sales of cage-free eggs is considerably less than 40%. So a lot of those eggs that are cage-free are not necessarily being marketed as cage-free. Um, so I I'm not sure. Again, I think some of it is sort of a pragmatism that it's safer to go cage free than to get caught and have it change. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that's the thought process, maybe.
I'm waiting for you to come up with a really clever chicken and the egg analogy here. Uh,
I should have. Yeah, I'm not on that, but yeah. But yeah, I don't know because I do think there's a pretty large segment of the consumers that just buy the cheapest egg,
sure.
right? Um, so that's where I hesitate to say it's really consumer driven.
That's where a lot of this is fascinating to me as a guy who did not grow up in the industry about what will be consumer driven, what is the producer driven. For for those who, want in every kind of what your scenario where you're talking about, kind of how you remember this back in the good old days, where animals are running, not running free, but almost running free, and what are the fewest chemicals we can use, and the fewest pesticides, and the fewest that, and the fewest that. But then you deal with cost concerns, and for the budget conscious consumer, for them, that's not really a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And for some, it's not necessarily their choice. There's economic issues for
Sure.
that. But yeah, it is an interesting challenge. And even some people who say they want all those things, again, when they get to the grocery store, don't necessarily follow through. So
Before we started recording, I was giving you trouble about your complicated life and all the different stuff you do here. But I'm curious, because you are a guy who gets out and about and you're talking to producers, from the really small, I just got a couple of birds in my backyard, to those with tens of thousands. What are people talking about? What are they asking you about?
yeah, I think, bird flu is an issue across the board, certainly. Um, I probably work with the small producers a lot more. And they have, some health issues that are somewhat due to poor biosecurity. And I don't mean that as a bash on them, but just, you talked about them running wild and free, and you're going to be exposed to bugs, and you're going to be exposed to wild birds and probably some rodents and things like that. So I do get a lot of health questions that, they're dealing with, that's maybe because of that. I think though that's probably my biggest thing.
And in theory, that could be something you're hearing about a lot more if people start moving, if this movement grows.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I don't know if you've seen, we had a salmonella outbreak here in the state, and I haven't worked with them directly, but I think it's going to be a big challenge to try to clean and disinfect when you've got birds outside.
Sure.
So that'll be a challenge that, an indoor producer wouldn't have as big a challenge to deal with. So.
It almost feels weird to talk to a guy sitting in Wisconsin and not talk about dairy, milk, something.
Yeah, I eat a lot of cheese. How about that?
Well, that's a state mandate, I think, isn't
I
it?
think so. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah.
Uh, Cheese on the omelets, probably, though.
Oh, yes.
That's how you
Yeah,
can save face.
right. Yeah.
The students that you have, because you do teach some, what are they interested in the future? They come from different backgrounds, so what are they looking to get into?
Um, we're very heavily populated with students that want to go to vet school. So even though I like to think of it as we're in the agricultural area, not so many of the students are. More of them are interested in cats and dogs. And it's, I think we can still give them a lot of good biology using chickens and cows and pigs as examples. So, but most of them, by and large, are interested in dogs and cats. But we have some that are interested more in ag animals. So yeah, there's a mixed bag.
Years ago, I looked at your campus in Madison to get my PhD. Of course, back then there was a woman involved who was the temptation to move to Madison. But that is also a big plus for all of you. Looking out at that campus and the lake is a stunning, stunning view.
Yeah, it's pretty. Not so much in the winter, but yeah, it is pretty.
Pretty to look at, maybe not in the winter, just not to be out on that lake or near
Right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep, but yeah, no, it's nice. We have a lot of advantages, I think, to offer. So
I always wonder when, when we read these stories about farms getting bigger and all that kind of stuff, if the younger generation, since we have fewer and fewer kids growing up, like you do on mom and dad's farm, if that is going to limit the interest of that generation to get into any of these associated fields. Have you been around long enough to see anything like that?
yeah, I do think it's a challenge. Um, you know, just the numbers is one issue. I, quite honestly, another thing is a lot of the, how to say this, but a lot of the students that maybe are coming from the farm are looking more for a business program, because even if they go back to a large farm, they're probably going to be more into the business aspect of it. And hiring people to do the day-to-day animal work, right? So, I think we have to provide a little more mix of that into our programs sometimes. But yeah, I think another thing we try to do here is to get some of those students that, like I said, come in wanting to work with cats and dogs, and show them that there's a lot of opportunities here with chickens or pigs or cows, right? So, but yeah, I think all those things are part of it.
And do you see more of them with kind of 1 foot on the farm, but 1 foot also thinking I'm going to have a income, or perhaps even my main income coming from off farm? And is that conversations you all have on campus to prepare for that?
I guess I haven't dealt with that as much. It's probably there. I just haven't really dealt with it. I think a lot of our larger poultry companies are big enough that they can provide full-time and good employment and benefits, to where maybe that's not such an issue. Now that's probably more someone, again, going to work for a company and not have their own farm necessarily.
Sure.
But I see that as sort of a positive with some of the bigger companies, is you don't have to have that.
All right. Well, we've gone through a bunch of stuff. We appreciate you jumping in here and kind of bringing us up to speed on what's been happening.
Yeah, hopefully you can make something out of that.
He's Ron Keene, Faculty Associate and Extension Specialist in Poultry Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. You can read the American Farmland Owner profile about Ron in our weekly newsletter. Find that at AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. Sign up and you can have that free newsletter sent right to your email inbox every week. Thanks for listening, and thanks for caring about the future of our farm.